Today, my name is Peter Gaylord, and I lead the business research and thought leadership team at Salesforce. And a big part of our mandate is really to go out and survey the industry, business leaders, IT leaders about what is going on in their business today, looking at trends, what patterns there are, what priorities, what challenges they're facing, and take that data and share it back out with our community for discussion and learning together. So in this session, we're actually going to cover a very recent study that we did and use it as a basis for discussion with our panel of experts here, and that is the State of IT report. So just to give you a little bit of background on that, it was conducted earlier this year. We surveyed about 2,200 global IT trailblazers, generally IT leaders, CIOs, on what their priorities are, what's changing in the IT industry right now. And just to set a baseline of context for this, I think we found some really interesting elements. So first of all, IT is under some of the biggest change that we've ever seen. This probably isn't a surprise to most of the people in the room. So 75% of the people that we surveyed said that IT is in its biggest change in history right now. 81% of them said that it's entering a new era and is being driven by the customer experience. Again, probably not a surprise when you think about what is actually changing the customer experience and the role that technology plays in that, and how IT, as part of the business, is really driving that. We'll touch on some of these themes a little bit more. And then 79%, almost 80% said that IT is the primary enabler of the customer experience. So let's go ahead and introduce our panelists today. I'm going to look at their bios here because I didn't memorize that part. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Ayka Agayeva. And Ayka is the Technical Operations Manager at Google. And in this role, she's over the years led many diverse teams and initiatives within the IT organization. Right now, she's applying the latest technologies to improve technical change and impact management experience at Google. And she lives at the intersection of a passion for technology, an excellent customer experience, and a focus on innovation. Before Google, Ayka led IT training for the University of Texas at Arlington. Hello, Ayka. Second, Brian Walsh, who is the CEO of Code Science. Code Science is one of the first product development outsourcing consultancies focused on building AppExchange products for SaaS companies. His company has brought over 100 products to market over the past 9 years and has recently been recognized by Salesforce as a master product development outsourcer. Brian wears many hats, both literally and figuratively, having handled every aspect of building a company from business management to product management to fundraising to engineering, sales. He makes a great cup of coffee too.
It's amazing.
And before that, before Code Science, Brian was a founder and CEO of Castfire, a media casting platform. Finally, Yousuf Khan, who is the CIO of Pure Storage, which is a data flash storage company. He's really the original CIO in that company, and in that role, he's helped the company scale infrastructure and processes through some of the fastest growth of any systems company in history. In addition to his role in the expansion and management of Pure's internal infrastructure, he serves as technical customer advocate, working closely with prospects and partners to provide strategic insight into challenging IT environments. He previously served as CIO of Qualsys and the Hull International Business School. All right, welcome. So let's dive into some of the findings of the report and use that just as a launching point. So the first is, probably not surprisingly based on some of the context that I've talked about, that there's really a blurring of the lines between IT and between the business units. And I'd like to start this off and put the first question to Ayka. So as we can see here, just as a starter stat, 77% of the people that we surveyed say that IT now functions as an extension or partner of the business units. And so Ayka, in your role where you're supporting the business units at Google, how are you seeing this evolving in that role?
Yep, definitely true. And from the beginning, we positioned IT, our corporate engineering at Google, we called corporate engineering, with the belief, with the philosophy that the IT was there to serve our business partners, to enable them to be as productive as they could be. So from the beginning, we've acted as their partners. And that has changed over the years. If I look at it from an individual user perspective, because they're also our partners, our customers, our users, our partners as well. One of the philosophies for our engineering department is empower Googlers, the internal employees, empower Googlers with world-leading technology. It's a pretty ambitious goal, it's a pretty ambitious vision, and that means allowing the employees to use what they need to be the most productive employees. And that can be from an individual level all the way to a business unit. And for us as IT, our goal is to make sure, can we give them what they need, but at the same time allow that to function well and efficiently in the internal corporate infrastructure environment. And the way that has changed for us, if I look back when I first started at Google 9 years ago, we're talking about traditional platforms, traditional technologies. And your standard platforms, mobile was just becoming the thing at that time. And over the years, that has moved to where we see more from our partners where we've solved the easy problems. And now we see both from the end users and from the business side, they want 10x enabling applications, 10x capability. From users, it could be that, okay, I'm happy with my laptop experience, but I'm on the go, I'm on the move, I work remotely, I travel a lot. I want to be able to do what I could do before, but on a mobile platform. And so from the business side, okay, our employees are on the move, they're traveling. We want to be able to use our enterprise applications, our stack, in the same way. And that obviously has its own challenges. I think cloud is also a really good, it has the capabilities to allow our users and allow our business partners to both meet that intersection of security, but also productivity on the go. So that's how I've seen it evolve. From development of end user applications that are more geared towards mobile users, on-the-go users, and to our business partners as well, where again, it's not just solving easy problems. Now they want to be able to do things that we couldn't have thought about doing before, whether it's a specific example, our real estate business, our real estate partner, real estate and workplace partners, they want their easy tasks that should be automated, that we could apply more of the automation, machine learning to it. So, why don't we try solving it? Why don't we start looking at these new technologies and experiment with them and see if that works for the business?
Cool. Sort of an extension of that, I guess I'll turn to Yousuf for you. You see one stat here, 67% are saying that collaboration with the business is actually becoming more important. Yeah. In the CIO role, a lot of it is about thinking, okay, well, how do I operationalize this relationship? And what kind of processes and execution guidelines do you think about when you're trying to, put that relationship and really facilitate that kind of communication and collaboration?
Yeah, so I think, a critical piece to this for CIOs and IT organizations, kind of going forward is that they will only be successful if they actually understand the basics of the business, right? And so many years ago, that role of the IT was effectively to kind of support, then move into kind of an enablement function. But now it actually has to be much more forward-looking. So, for example, we have members of my team who are, have built up partnerships, with a lot of the different departments, but also they've gone into a lot of depth of actually understanding the business. Mm-hmm. And that actually helps us to be able to help prioritize. So when you start, being able to present at either QBRs and with the executive team, whatever your priorities are in direct context in relation to where the company's priorities are, right? And so what's important right now and why you see that number, and it's probably going to increase over time, is because you really need to be able to make sure that your plans and priorities are completely in sync with the business. And you need to be able to speak that language, right? Mm-hmm. And so, for example, when we go into, we became a public company a couple of years ago, and of course that journey has been nothing but interesting to be able to understand all the regulations that go into putting in a compliance aspect of it. But then if you go forward in terms of how do you basically get better productivity with your employees? Well, the reason that you're doing that is because you understand you're trying to, your target is to, based on revenue. And so you've got to therefore look at it from that lens, is to say, how do you prioritize your work, which says, how do I enable better productivity from my sales organization, right? And of course, Salesforce is a big part of that answer. And so therefore you have to do a lot more depth and understanding about where you can make that impact, right? And so that collaboration is only going to increase. And actually probably going to get a lot more depth. In terms of processes, it's a lot more about just being able to just deeply embed ourselves within those businesses. We ask actually leaders from the organization to come speak at our all hands, so they can, so whether it's someone who works at a level 1 help desk or otherwise, they actually understand the company message and they're able to actually articulate that. So.
Okay. So I'd like to hear from Brian on the next topic to start with, and that's really about innovation. So when we're talking about, partnering with a business, part of it is to what end, and how do we perceive the value of that? And when we talk to the respondents, we saw some patterns emerge around like, what is the point of this innovation? And it really comes down to the disruption in a fast-moving marketplace. And so, Brian, when we were talking, you were talking a lot about, iterative product development, getting things out to market, getting things fail fast, and using that instead of some sort of monolithic approach to it. So how do you see that model plays into that disruptive innovation?
Yeah, so I should back up, and 70-80% of our business is building product on the App Exchange and working with these large software companies. The other portion of our business is actually working with IT groups, and it tends to be extremely large projects, strategic projects for groups. And so it's Willis Towers Watson, it's Salesforce, it's Apple working with these groups. And in the highest performing companies that we see on the IT side and our software side of software development or for product development, there's little difference between the two organizations. Right? In a great product company, there's alignment between the product development side, product managers, marketing, sales. It's one big group that's going forward. And we see the same thing on the IT side, that there is this, on high-performing groups, there's a great alignment between those groups and they're operating together. As we move to lower performing, it starts getting heavily driven on process and past mistakes. Right? And so everything that's put in place is really these processes that they've put in place to correct from the past. So now they're driving with their hands on the rearview mirror because they don't want to make the mistake that they used to make. And part of that then is it's not about speed anymore. It's not about fast iterations. It's not about get the first product out. And the most important part is to listen to our users, to listen to the business users and then iterate. And that's exactly what we see on the product side. Get an MVP to market. Listen, iterate. It's okay to throw it away if you have to and start over. We can't break it. These are sometimes mission-critical systems, but we can iterate quickly. So we want to do much smaller releases and not large one time out the door. And a lot of times we're afraid to make that mistake and get yelled at like we used to or have a system fail for us. So we find it's actually safer and faster. And the top performing and innovating IT groups are actually the ones that are moving in smaller chunks, much faster, and responding to the business need as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think part of playing into that is this idea, again, with the role of the relationship with businesses, how IT is acting as an innovation engine, right? And managing that perception as part of the relationship. So for Ayka, I think managing that relationship and communicating with the business about the role of IT as an innovator, not just a group that's keeping the lights on. We've heard that over and over again, that there's always this constant battle. I think in our most recent survey, it was almost 2/3 of the people surveyed said they're spending most of their time just keeping the lights on. As you're making that shift into an innovation engine, how, with your team, are you making sure there's that consistent communication and that managing that perception with your business partners?
Yes. It's a tricky one. I think, yes, like you said, every IT organization and business partner struggles with that. In our particular case, we made a call that the keeping the lights on is important, and it will always be, if you let it, it will take 100% of your time. And we set aside, so there are two things here. First is the time, actually dedicating the time to innovation, to free thinking, to experimenting. We don't know where this is going to lead, but let's just try it. And let's say within the organization, within the team, we say we're going to set aside 20, 30, however much you can afford. Set aside time, and it's our innovation time, and we don't compromise it.
And you hear a lot about this with Google as being a real sort of core philosophy. So,
right, yes, because a lot of amazing things have come out of those 20, 30% experimentations. So even with the business, we want to make sure that time is set aside where we can do this. We can keep the business running, but still have the time that is uncompromised for that. So time is one thing, but also the technology, and I want to add to what you said earlier, Yousuf, about being able to understand what the business needs are. Sometimes businesses have requirements, but they may not have the insight that you have into technology, which means what they're asking for may be limited by what they know. And they may not be thinking of the full potential. And having this time carved out for innovation allows you to experiment and present technologies that may have not been thought about before. One example we had was our, again, real estate organization. They struggled with getting reports about broken equipment from the Googlers, and they hadn't thought about automating it in any way. So our IT department, through a few experimentation projects, we came up with the idea on a mobile device, no matter where you are in the building or on campus, you could press one button and it would log a trouble ticket for that equipment. It knew what equipment it was, it knew what location it was. And they had never thought about it as a need, and they would have never asked about it. So to your point, knowing what the business needs, but also having a little bit of that observing their workflow. Sometimes the data is there, sometimes data is not enough. Sometimes it takes you sitting with the business and observing what they're doing to find those opportunities for the technology, where technology can boost their productivity. So to me, that's one part of it. How do you make sure that you have that dedication? And there's other pieces to innovation too, which I think we often don't talk about. Innovation is not always about launching a new product. It's also being able to take something from POC, from an experimental product, and operationalizing it, where you can deploy it in mass scale, take it from few testing groups to 10,000, 100,000 people. And there's quite a bit of challenge in that, and I think that's actually one of the harder innovations to do as well, more challenging innovations to do as well. So for my teams, that's what I say. Innovation is not always coming up with the next shiny product. Sometimes that innovation time is also figuring out, okay, how do you actually make it scalable? How do you make it reliable? That can work for the entire company.
And making sure that's visible with the organization that you're working with, right? Yeah.
So, completely agree. I think it's important to also sort of formulate this, there's a lot of terms, and maybe it's because of the geography we live in, they're overly used, and, there's a romanticized aspect of it, right? Which is digital transformation, business transformation, innovation, and it all basically has to translate into, all of us building some rocket ships, et cetera, which, there's more to it than that, right? And so I think when we look at innovation we've got to actually think much more broadly, right? Being able to automate a process which used to take 8.5 hours to do, and now basically takes several minutes, is innovative in its own right? Because you're able to bring in much more productivity gain in place. The other aspect is, candidly speaking, a lot of this innovation is done in partnership in some of the ecosystem that fundamentally Salesforce has built, right? That's been kind of the heart of kind of innovation, at least definitively from a business operations standpoint. So when we look at business challenges from a sales perspective, or even an operations perspective, or even a finance and a transaction perspective, you actually look at that as a pain point from a requirement standpoint. Then you sort of say, well, okay, you can go and search for different applications to see how it can figure out and speak to your peer group. But then you can go speak to companies like Code Science and others and sort of say, well, actually, this is my business problem that I'm trying to solve here. And actually, that's actually the power of the innovation story, is actually being able to get IT to understand and connect and translate the business, understand a clear path to how you can basically solve the problem, and do that in an innovative fashion, right? And so that's kind of working within the ecosystem is actually a big part of how a lot of these companies innovate on the Salesforce platform.
So let's stick with you for a second on this next piece, because I want to hear, we had touched on something in the prep for this as it relates to speed. So obviously, innovation is about direction plus speed to be able to do stuff like that. Brian was talking a little earlier about, iteration, but part of this as well is, we're seeing that you can't separate out the changes in technologies and tools available to you, the roles of people in the business, how they're helping partner with IT and helping solve some of those things themselves. The way that the skill requirements are changing in the IT organization is part of that. So, when we look at, obviously, 2/3 are saying the speed of development cycles is a critical or high priority, and then we're seeing this trend towards low-code development and other things that are helping accelerate that. What does that mean in terms of the talent pool that you have and the skills that are required from the IT team?
So 2 things on that. And actually, I fundamentally believe, and maybe this is slightly controversial to say, but I think very, very few companies are really going to succeed in the software business unless they are very serious about understanding that most companies want to operate on a platform. And, and those platforms like Salesforce and others build ecosystems and innovations being built on that platform because from a productivity standpoint, people need to have focus and businesses need to operate in a consistent fashion, right? So yes, you've had this big emergence of SaaS and you've got all of these, it's easy to be able to buy these applications within, but if they're not talking to each other, that's going to break somewhere down the line. And that's actually going to be a hindrance, right? And so when it comes to talent pool, there are some key things which happen. People, within the actual teams who actually understand those platforms. And so, if you go outside, there's a little thing called Trailhead, which has effectively become, an education community. And that's basically being able to get people in place to understand how to basically build in that ecosystem. At Dreamforce last year, we had the session where you're able to sort of build this app. If you think about companies like Bloomberg, right? Bloomberg has got this huge, amazing model where if you are a business school student, you will be able to available for full training on a Bloomberg terminal anywhere in the world, as long as it's a Bloomberg office. And why is that? Because by the time you graduate, you have Bloomberg in your resume, which says, I know how to operate this. And so therefore, if you're in a financial firm and that's basically part of the ecosystem, that basically is a skill, right? And so therefore, people who are able to understand and work across a platform, how the platform talks to each other, and to be able to build on top of that, that's where you sort of build towards. And I think that's kind of going to be the focus for us.
Brian, could you extend on that a little bit? Like, I think you're in an enviable position to see what a lot of companies are doing, right? You're working with
officially
clients.
hate you.
Oh, this is awesome. You sound like my family.
You see a lot of different clients, different sizes of companies that are all facing a similar broad set of issues, their own implementations of these things. But, how are tools like low code, platforms fitting into that? What are some of the trends that you're observing and how are companies trying to execute on this kind of concept?
Yeah, and I'll build on top of where you were. I think that a lot of this is buy versus build. A lot of times. That's the first decision that we have to come to. And as we look at that general SaaS ecosystem, you do have that problem of integration, right? I don't have a single system of record anymore. How do I deal with this? I think that's one of the things for us around the App Exchange. I'm going to pull this back to a very Salesforce-specific implementation, but we'll use that as an idea for it. The App Exchange as a central idea of on my system of record, on this single database, I have everything built on top of it now. And so all of my IT systems are operating as one, essentially out of the box. I think it's a brilliant idea. It really speeds our process together. And with Lightning coming out, what it's asked for our business leaders, it's asked for our Salesforce administrators, bringing it out of the coding aspect, is for them to act as their own product managers, to go and assemble their solutions of dropping these components together. And it doesn't matter if it's a component that they've written themselves because they've been on Trailhead, or they've used an App Exchange product, or their IT group has developed. But they're able to actually assemble that into their own solution for themselves and move that forward. So we're democratizing that across our organizations. And again, I think that leads to greater speed and response times. So it's not coming to a central hub to say, we need to modify this operations. How do I send out a signature or generate documents or whatever that process is. They're able to start assembling these on their own. And I think that's incredibly powerful and really new for where we're at in IT.
So I'd like to hear from Ayka on this as well. When we were chatting earlier about security and what does security mean as you're changing some of these approaches that you have. Obviously at Salesforce, we talk about trust being our number one value. As you get into a world where you have platforms, in some cases citizen developers that are involved in these things we hear about, what does that mean from a security and security infrastructure standpoint?
Yeah, so it does have its challenges. I love the word you use, democratizing. I think we hear that a lot lately. Democratizing development. And of course, that's going to introduce its own challenges with security, with best practices. The important thing here to me is, so first off, I think it's naive to think that we can, what's the word I'm looking for, to oversee every single citizen development. It's just not practical, it's not possible. So you want to make sure that you have guardrails, the right guardrails set up in place, and this is where low-code development, platform development really comes in handy because there are a lot of security a lot of recovery options are built into it. So even if somebody makes a critical mistake, tragic mistake, it's easier to recover from it. You can put in guardrails where you can make sure that certain roles, certain groups of users have only certain level of access to other users' data. So these guardrails can protect you, can protect the developer, can protect the users, can protect the data. So that's one step, setting up those guardrails. The second point of it, the second piece in my mind is, again, you can't oversee, you can't control all citizen development. I don't think you should. You should give people this outlet, this innovation. A lot of good things have come out of citizen development as well. But there is a tipping point. There's a pivot point where something that is developed by citizens, when it becomes a business critical application, I think that's where it has to change. There are oftentimes citizen development is about developing wrappers or automation, things that can be done in other ways, and it's more of an automation of that task, making it easier. And in those cases, it's not as critical as if this was the only way to perform a business critical task. When you get into that territory, you have to ask yourself the question, does it make sense for this to be developed, to be developed by and managed by your citizens? It probably is a good call to start discussing it and bring it into the IT engineering, into central engineering and operations oversight. But I think there are things, it depends on the organization, it depends on the culture in the organization, and each organization can have their own guidelines on what they consider to be a business critical application that should probably have on-call support and testing and recovery, all of that built into it.
Great. So let's move to the last finding that we had in the report that we're going to cover today, and that's around AI. Of course, you don't have to look very far outside this door to see a lot of that we're focusing on AI. And as we, in a separate report, were talking to business users in general and consumers, we found that a full 2/3 are expecting dramatic impact on their day-to-day life as an employee as a result of AI. At the same time, when we look at the IT side of things, if you look on the right-hand side here, only 23% of IT leaders really have fully baked their plans around AI for business and for technology. The numbers are pretty low there, so it's still pretty early. You see a lot of people that are doing this, getting into it, starting to use it selectively. And so, Yousuf, from a CIO's perspective, how does a company go about deciding where to start with this stuff so that they can actually have a sensible plan moving forward?
So I think we're exceptionally lucky in so much that we, this is my third stint as the first CIO for a company, and so one of the things that I thought about when I took on this role was just make sure that you take all the lessons that you've learned from the very few successes and probably the lots of failures I had and how I don't repeat them. And one of those was really about basically making sure that if you want to be able to build up much more automation, you need to start and focusing with machine learning being at the heart of that automation, right? Artificial intelligence is much later on down the line, and I think the lines are getting blurred. So I will definitively say you need to focus first and foremost on machine learning, because that basically allows you to be able to focus on building algorithms, build out a rules engine, and understanding linear regression. Now, the fundamental aspects for all of this is data, right? And so if before you start even going down this road of I'm going to build an AI engine, I'm going to get in touch and try and work out an AI bot that I want to do, it is absolutely completely pointless to do so if you do not understand the shape of your data and actually how much you have to do to be able to structure that better. So the reason that number is so low is because of that, because you start with this intention, you're oh yeah, I've got this Slack app, and Einstein came out, and Watson is there, et cetera, and you kind of get overwhelmed by it, and you're okay, how do I put this in place? And then you come along, they're okay, let's look at your opportunity record. Okay, actually, let's just structure this in place. You're oh, right, okay, so no, I've got multiple records trying to represent, I don't even have it's not even about, these are the basics which you need to put in place foundationally, right? Because a lot of this is based on rules and logic, and so you need to be first logical with your data to be able to build on it. And the second thing is be very, very focused on a very clear outcome. So the AI project the machine learning project that we did, we spent 7 months working with a startup. We are the first customer for this startup, which had been working in stealth. The developers came to our office on a weekly basis. We went back and forth with them. And we've built something out because from an IT operational perspective. Why did we do that? Well, because we got to a stage that the company is growing so rapidly that people join, they want to be onboarded quickly, and they want to have access to application. They want to speak to a weird guy like me saying, oh, by the way, my ticket's behind, can you basically get this resolved? They actually want to go into Okta or Salesforce, request an application, get it provisioned. And so we're able to reduce cycle time, which used to take on average 8 to 10 hours, right down to literally a minute, and that's a conversational aspect. If the bot cannot basically solve it, it will create a ticket and assign it to the right person in the team. That in itself is an easy reduction of about 3-4 hours in productivity gain, right? Now, that doesn't sound amazing by any measure, right? It's not AI, it's not, Arnold Schwarzenegger coming in to basically, clean up house, but it basically solves a major business problem. Right? And that basically means that before, when I used to have to count, allow productivity of my team, I can now do this in a much more sufficient fashion.
And I think really it's the idea of this sort of like incremental, test, roll it out, get some productivity, build on that they're hearing. So Ayka, from the staffing side of things, we talked a little bit earlier about, in general, the impact of citizen developers and what that means on skills and innovation on skills. Well, AI, obviously is like a pretty 800-pound gorilla when it comes to the impact on the skill set. So, what advice do you have around the types of skills or how people should be thinking about preparing themselves from a workforce standpoint as AI is entering the picture like this?
Yes, I want to add first to what Yousuf said, that machine learning, AI, it's such a broad term. But oftentimes, if you actually start thinking about it as the solution, you've missed the problem. So you first need to understand what is the problem that you're solving. It goes back to being able to align with the business, being able to understand the business needs, so to make sure that you're not building Taj Mahal when all the business needs is a shed to put their shoes in. Because you have to think about the operational and technical debt that you'll incur with that. And I think oftentimes we jump at ML and AI and we think it's a solve-all magic pill, and oftentimes it may not be. And in our case, and that's what I talk to my teams about, first you really need to understand the need of the customer. You need to focus on the user, you need to focus on the customer, you need to focus on the business, understand what the problem is, and then let's think what would be the most appropriate, and I would say, what would be the simplest way to solve that problem? Because modular, simpler way is the way you're going to be able to maintain it and scale it and build on top of it. And sometimes it's machine learning. Sometimes it could be descriptive analytics. I think oftentimes it's more of the data, being able to analyze that data and take an action based on that data rather than machine learning and AI that has to make the decision. But it is something that we know is there. It is something that we need to invest in. So one of the things I ask my teams to do is, one, yes, understand the business need, be able to analyze the data, understand the data science. You don't have to be data scientist, but you have to be data practitioner to be able to know how to use that data. And then look for opportunities to experiment. There are so many ML tools. There are so many descriptive analytic tools. They do different things. If you do a quick search, it will probably tell you what it's best for, what kind of problems it's best for solving. But in all honesty, there isn't actually a huge difference between them. So just picking one and experimenting and learning from it is what I tell my team members, my teams, my orgs. I say, just do it. Pick one, play with it, see if it actually solves a problem you think it should solve. Does it meet the customer needs? And then let's build on top of that.
Okay. Brian?
So we have this great honor of working with both Lattice Engines and 6th Sense Insight, who are both number 1 and 2 in the Forrester mix. And we were the first cohort for the Salesforce incubator. So lots of AI companies in there, Nova AI. Worked in another company called Solvi. And I think the resounding issue, or the resounding success that we see is specificity. When you're being very specific, understanding your data, trying to work on this tool of solving a specific answer, going for, is it cross-sell, upsell? Is it reducing cases, right? Case deflection by providing the actual answers rather than a link to an article. Those specific things are much easier to use for the generation of AI that we're in. Whereas when it's a broad question that you're trying to answer, you just want to throw AI and see if there's an answer, you're very unlikely to find success there. So be really, really specific, understand that data set, train for it, and as you said, experiment with that.
That's great. Oh, go ahead.
And there are a lot of tools that are also available because I'm going to use the word you used earlier, democratizing.
Yep.
We're also democratizing machine learning. This is because we know this is the future. This is how we're going to evolutionize the industry. There are a lot of free tools available. So just spending some time playing around with them goes a long way.
Great. So I'd like to save a little bit of time here to take a question or two from the audience. Does anyone have a question for our panelists? Nobody. Okay. Well, so then what I'd ask from the panelists then is, what sort of one piece of advice do you have to try and net together some of these things? Maybe start with Yousuf on some of these IT trends that we're seeing.
So I think the key thing should be really about having much more rigorous focus, because the amount of change that's kind of coming along the way for IT organizations themselves are transforming. And so being able to focus priorities towards business outcomes is priority number one. Priority number two is, yes, I agree totally with Ayka about actually being able to experiment and build and actually work with companies to be able to trial. The only word of caution is any of them say we're working with a search engine which we can't talk about, they should call her up to basically confirm it. Most of them have .ml in their domain, and they always may have bragging rights about that. So, but I've got your back.
Ayka, Brian?
I'm going to actually take it out of IT and look at other groups within the business. So if we look at the top performing sales teams, and we talk about investment in sales, it's not always headcount of number of salespeople. It is sales enablement, it is sales coaching, it is management, it is process.
That's a great point.
And that, to me, is how we need to treat our IT teams. It's not always about the number of bodies, it's our investment in automation and training and alignment that we have going on. So if you looked at the demo jam yesterday, all of those tools were about automating this IT process. Capato, who was the winner of that, right? How do we put CI and CD in place? How do we do our Selenium testing, everything, to get faster iterations, to have more confidence when we're going? So I think investing in our teams, and not just the headcount, but their ability to perform and operate and quickly iterate, is probably the key to actually moving this forward.
I think I'm going to go back to experimenting and being comfortable with failure, because you can't actually innovate if you don't fail. And I think we're often too afraid. So we do look for that perfect solution, and we never actually get to get it out of the door. So innovate, to me, equals failure, and learning from those failures. And understanding the user, understanding the customer, and building whatever you're building with the user in mind. So it's launch and iterate, experiment, fail, but in all of those cases, it's the user, it's the customer, it's the business that is the priority, and building for that need, and building scalable, small, modular solutions. Again, I'm going to use the analogy of Taj Mahal versus a shed. Building a shed, when the shed does what the user needs, because you can easily build on top of it. You can pick it up and move it. It doesn't incur the same type of technical and operational debt. And I think we are seeing shift in that as well, where we're favoring more of these smaller, scalable application developments.
Great. Well, thank you. So with that, we're going to wrap it up here. First of all, thank you to all three of you for coming and sharing. I learned a lot today. I hope that the folks in the audience did as well. Just, with a parting thought here, the stats that we discussed today and a whole lot more insights are in the State of IT report. You can get it by just going to salesforce.com/research. There's that, plus all of our reports are available. Or if you're so inclined right now, you can text State of IT to 38767 along with your email address, and you'll get access to it right away from your phone. So again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.